Hello and welcome to season 10 of How to Start Up, where we will cover everything brand, as well as what to do now, next and never when starting or scaling a business. Hosted by me, Juliet Fallowfield, founder of B Corp certified PR, communications and podcasting consultancy, Fallowfield and Mason. Our mission is to enable you to own your PR in-house with a long-term view. Creating a brand story is a central part of building your overall brand identity. It's crucial that your brand story is coherent and resonates with your audience to attract loyal customers. In this episode, I speak with Tom Marchant, owner and co-founder of luxury travel company Black Tomato. Tom and his co-founders launched their business in 2005 after seeing firsthand how people had such little time to plan their own travel experiences. Since then, Black Tomato has grown exponentially and delights clients all over the world, and it's all thanks to their brand. Tom shares his advice on how you should begin drafting your brand story and what you should and shouldn't include within it. This season will be about branding, so super excited to chat to you about this, given that you have built one. But to kick off with, it would be wonderful if you could start with a brief introduction as to who you are and a bit about the business that you founded.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Tom Marchant. I'm the co-founder of Black Tomato. It's a luxury travel company specialised in putting together what we believe are remarkable travel experiences for people, where we take them all over the world. Everything from immersive trips in wildernesses to beautiful private houses to odysseys through jungles, amazing multi-generational family holidays where they're just really connecting with cultures. It's all about giving some people something remarkable, and we've got a team of brilliant people who are curious and passionate about the world and want to showcase it to our clients in that way. So yes, that's Black Tomato. We started it in, makes you feel old, 2005 in London, myself and my two business partners, James Merritt and Matt Smith.
So pre-pandemic?
Pre-pandemic. Yeah, it was pre-pandemic and also, but just pre-recession, which sort of kicked in about 2008, which was, again, a big learning experience. And then, it's just grown from there. And we now have a lot of people that work in the UK, but also particularly the United States. That's our core market. We've grown there significantly over the business's lifetime so far. It actually led to me being based in the US for just over 5 years. I was in New York and LA between 2013 and 2019. And I'm still in New York probably every 5 weeks or so. It's a really cool business for us. Not on planes as much as I was probably pre-pandemic and having a family, but still on the road and up in the skies quite a lot.
And for you, given travel is such an emotional, obviously experiential thing for people to book, how important was your brand when you launched it?
It was everything, if I'm honest. I think when we started the company, or rather had the idea, in fact, if you go way back, sort of having the idea for a business, even before we necessarily went for travel, our belief was we wanted to build a brand. And that was because we felt passionately that if you build a brand that people believe in and feel a connection to and have empathy for, so much other stuff comes a little bit more easily. And so that was right at the front of our minds when we then were looking at the travel space and saw the opportunity for what became Black Tomato. But yeah, since day one, it was, we want to build a brand here. It wasn't like, let's build a business, we need to brand it. It was like, let's build a brand. So from the bottom up, we were always thinking about what we stood for, what we believed in, how we'd communicate that, how we would establish connection between us and our target audience. And also recognize that would act as we hoped, a guiding light for us, because we knew what we stood for, and that would take us through good times and bad. So yeah.
Brand values, brand communications. I always joke in the office because we're in communications and PR, and I was like, if we just put the word brand in front of everything, people pay probably 3 times as much, because brand is, I find from an external perspective working with founders, so related to ego, not in a negative way, but it really is your shop front. It is what people understand about your business, and it's your visual brand and it's your tone of brand. Everything comes in under this.
It does. And it's your DNA ultimately for us. It's what defines us, and not from an ego point of view. It's actually how
your
to
rudder.
it makes life a bit easier, if I'm honest, because we know what we stand for. We regularly reminded the reasons to why we started the company and what we believe in and why we want to keep going. And
so your brand vision and mission.
Yeah, you have to get that right. I believe, and again, this is just my personal experience, but if you get that, particularly at the start, it's your rudder. It gives you a framework to operate within, because also in those early startup days, it's very easy But even with a brand focus, we still very easy to go down different roads or down rabbit holes in the pursuit of maybe short-term revenues or something that you could do to keep alive or get ahead. But some of those calls would have eroded what we stood for or trying to achieve. And it's difficult because you've got to get the balance right, because you've got to be alive to do what you want to achieve. But it set the tone, it set the course, and it's as important today as it was back then. It's a key part of our business and our story.
And speaking of story, this episode was going to focus on a brand story. How would you describe a brand story to those that are unsure of what it means? Because there's a lot of hot air when it comes to founding a company.
Yeah, I think I'd also say, when it comes to branding and stories, you could talk for hours on it and hear a multitude of different opinions. For me, the brand story is basically a window into your world, and that you are letting people see behind the curtain of the business and allowing them to understand why you do what you do, why you're doing it, why you believe in it. And through that, you hope that you'll build connection to that customer. I don't know about you, but me personally, I like to understand what's behind the brand I see. I might see a brand and think, okay, that looks beautiful. The tone of voice is great. It's really well executed. But where I really get passionate is when I understand the background, the story, and see who's behind it. So a story it can touch on many points, from who the founders are, how they met, why they chose to do what they do, what's the purpose of the business, what are the values they wanted to build the business around, what is the product, why is that different to others.
So it's relatable. People can have a more of a kind of touch point to it. It's not just faceless.
Yeah, it has to be relatable. I think there's also, with lots of branding agencies, you could come up with so much corporate jargon, and it could still mean nothing, right? So for me, it has to be I'm well aware of using lots of kind of cliche marketing words, but it has to feel authentic. It has to be you, right? So ultimately, your brand story is about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that encompasses your purpose, your belief, why you think what you're doing stands you apart, and why someone should use you. And you just hope through doing that. I would always say, our three values at our company, by the way, are being humble, thoughtful, and curious. And so for us, we do it in a humble way. It's not about beating your chest and saying, we're the best, and so you're going to need to use it to say, look, we believe in something, we're passionate about it. And you do it in the hope that someone else will agree and connect and say, okay, I'm going to use these guys. I'm going to try them out because I can see that story, where they've come from, what their belief is.
And they resonate with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was going to ask you why it's so important, but I think you've answered that. But what would you say happens when you get it wrong?
I think when you get it wrong, for me, is when you don't believe in it. It's when I think sometimes we've seen, I wouldn't name names, but you can see when some brand stories are trotted out, that it's been dreamt up in a boardroom because the belief is it will play well to an audience. But actually, if it's not true to actually the origin story, or it's not true to the deep down beliefs of the people in that room, it gets seen through quite quickly. I think to be authentic, you need to be, as much as you can, be transparent. But yeah, you can get it wrong if you don't believe in it. If you also get your tone wrong, which is, I think, ego doesn't belong in brand stories. I think you can be confident, you can be assured, but you need to
honest.
Just communicate that you're trying to do something that you believe in. If you've got a business, I should also add that even if you don't believe in it, but you think it can be successful, that's great. But don't make up a brand story to convey this belief, because customers see through it and hold you to account on it, as will your staff if you're recruiting people against that. If you don't really act in the way that you are communicating you should be,
that inconsistency, you lose trust, I think. And for us, aside from hosting a podcast, our day job is teaching founders how to own their own storytelling and PR. And it's not just customers. Journalists will prod and poke and ask further questions, and you need to have a really robust story behind you. And what's better than it being completely honest and transparent, because then you stand by it and you know the answers.
That's the key thing. I'd say when it's honest and it's you and you know it, well, the points you made there about questions, that it's a lot easier to be talking about something that is A, it's true, and B, you believe in it. I think when it's, if you're creating a story or a brand vision that is within a framework and has been for presentation purposes, there's no belief behind it, then people do get nervous about talking about it, because what if I have to talk about that?
And when someone's thinking about developing their brand story, is there a golden piece of advice that you give them to get going? Because it's a long process, and I think people need to know that they're never going to know the answer straight off the bat, but just to start.
Yeah, I always say it has to be authentically you.
Did you start sketching stuff down?
We actually sat in a room with a friend of mine who's a brilliant strategist, and we come from different backgrounds. We knew what our brand wanted to be, but we just talked, and we did a little workshop between the four of us. But when we got it down, and then it started mapping out. But again, what we were doing was it's all in our heads. We knew it was there. So we were actually just telling a story that had existed. So that's the other thing. It goes back to being authentic. Authenticity should mean it's coming from somewhere of truth. And so when you're then putting a story together, you're tapping into something that's happened, that you believe in, that's true. If you start trying to create different narratives that don't reflect what's happened or what you believe in or who you are, that's where you start risking setting yourself up for a fall down the line.
I find it really interesting when we chat to founders, because it is all in their head. They do know all the answers, but it's trying to get them out of the weeds and pull it out to make sure it's succinct and it's robust and it's clear. And we often say, can you articulate your business in one breath? But then for your brand story, obviously you've got more of a long form opportunity. Were there any practical tips you could share on how to get from A to B?
Yeah. Firstly, to your point, is keep it simple. Brand story should not be indulgent and navel gazing, right? It's not about you.
I'm sending this podcast episode to all my future clients, but just listen to this and then we'll chat.
Right. Keep it simple and share what matters. Okay. From a business perspective. And what matters is, as I see it, is what will the customer connect with? What are they interested in hearing? I won't say who they are, but I was in the office once of a unicorn business that everyone knows up in San Francisco. And they had their brand story plastered all around the walls, and it looked beautiful and stuff, but it was so indulgent. And you just thought, this is where sort of the ego's got too far ahead. You've got to work out what it's for. So yeah, for us, it's keep it simple, understand what's important to share, park the ego, and make sure that it's easy to understand. People don't need to know. We often talk about how the three of us met traveling, because we did. I want someone saying, we should talk all about the trips you did, all that stuff. I was like, I just don't think people need to know that right now. They know that we connected over a lot of travel and that we've done these parts of the world. But a lot of that other stuff, whilst I think it's just superfluous when I'm trying to tell someone about the origins of the brand and then what we stand for. So it's keep it simple, be succinct, tell the bits that matter, don't indulge, and just bring clarity to it. But you can do clarity also in a really friendly, approachable, welcoming, honest way. I think that sometimes people think being clear or succinct falls into a really
corporate
corporate tone of voice. It's not. It's keeping it simple is actually often how people talk to each other.
And speaking English, and I think a lot of the work we do with people is knowing their audience and knowing what they could resonate and what they want to hear. And often with clients, we want to be on Vogue. But why does a Vogue reader want to read about you on Vogue? Going to the nth degree and then working backwards, I think is quite useful.
I think that's such a good point about knowing the audience and how what they're interested in, but also to that point, how they want to be spoken to or how you can connect. When we started, one of our views of the travel industry was that it was, in terms of our space, the luxury travel side, but also in other areas, I think it was very formulaic. It was everyone spoke in the same way, and this terribly cliched, cheesy language describing places in just language you'd never describe it if you're talking about it with your friends. But the kind of industry had just fallen into like trope. So for us, and it's not like it was revelation, but we said, look, we're just going to talk about ourselves and what we do. This is part of our brand, in the way that you talk about it to your friends, in the way that your best friend who lives in that city of the world who talked about it. So you talk about it in a way that's passionate, informed, but approachable. And what you get from that is when people start reading that language, the response we got was, oh God, they're like me. And this is a people like me company. I've been looking for that. I've been maybe using these people who are all great, but I've never really felt a connection. And language, which is at the heart of a brand, is such a powerful way of connecting to people. So for us, right out the gate, it was, we need to talk in a language that's us, firstly, authentically us, but one that will build connection and that people will appreciate is the other thing. So yeah, understanding your audience, what they want, but also how you should be talking to them.
You make a really interesting point, because in travel, an image speaks 1,000 words. And travel, I remember Jeremy Jauncey at Beautiful Destinations saying that when he hit Instagram, the finance sector and the travel sector the least Instagrammable sectors, and or were least present on Instagram. And he obviously fixed that with beautiful destinations. But
Yep.
it's so interesting to hear that somebody who has mastered the travel industry and is clearly successful in that is also putting importance against language. I think a lot of people we meet is all about the photography, all about the videography. It's the words, because the words feed SEO, but also the words are things that people can relate to and last longer in a way.
Yeah, and also it's the words that I think can stand you apart, right? So as travel's become so ubiquitous within social media platforms, it can get increasingly hard to differentiate based on what you do, what you should stand for, based on an image, because everyone's got that image, always treating it or doing certain ways. And yeah, in the days of brochures, and we've never done a brochure back in the day, everyone would be using the same imagery. And actually, then if you put your hand over the logo and then you read the copy, you could not tell them apart. They were all saying the same things. And so for us, it was like, firstly, could we use imagery and videography in a more compelling way and how we develop that content, which I think we do. But also it's like, it's the language, because it's where the language is where you can convey your value or your USP or why users. And that's also where you can build relationship in terms of on a emotional level and a psychological level, because you're talking a language they recognize. I think when we also came into it, I remember being sat on the tube one day, looking at a place. It was an advert for a destination. And I knew the destination and it's an amazing place. But the people who put that advert together seemed to have done the best job in the world of making it look terrible and sound rubbish from the language they were using and the generic stock imagery they were using. And so for me, it was this irony that in travel, like we have literally the world to play with of all these stunning, beautiful assets, but these places that create these amazing experiences and feelings within you. And it was our job to articulate particularly how it was going to make you feel. And so for us, when we came at travel, it was about the pursuit of feeling. It still is. So when we first launched our first website, we never actually listed destinations. We just we categorized things according to feelings. So how places were going to make, so if you're looking to feel, this is it. And now it was slightly radical in the days because
I think it's genius.
No one did it that way. It wasn't great from those days, but actually it wasn't so big a thing. But so now we have a blend of destinations, feelings, but that's at the heart. And what's one of the most powerful ways of conveying a feeling? It's language.
So when you guys were putting pen to paper, how long did it take until you had something that you were happy with? Or is it constantly evolving? Or both?
I think it's constantly evolving. I don't think it was sort of like there were things like we need to have this in place by then because we're launching a website. We need people to understand what we are. But in terms of one and done, and then we move on, it was never that way. I mean, there were principles from which we based our brand, and our brand story then was just beginning. There was a story in terms of how we met, what we believed in, why we were doing this, and why we wanted people to believe in it like we did. But that's the start, right? And so then your brand story keeps building as you grow. So that could involve in multiple things in terms of how you are developing products, how you are connecting with customers, things you may have achieved, not an ego thing, but things that demonstrate why what you do resonates. So it's always been, the story is always evolving. The principles need to be in place. But I think to get back to your question, if you think from first point of like, we need to articulate who we are and what we've done to having it ready, I don't know, it's probably a couple of weeks, just back and forth, sitting with things, get something down, walk away from it, come back a day later, look at it, tweak it. But then also don't be a slave to perfection on this stuff. When you're in startup mode, having something that you're 90% happy with is probably going to be 110% for someone reading it.
And in startup years, it's like dog years. A week is like a year, and everything can change. So just get something.
It honestly can. I've seen startups, maybe doing startups who I'll see them and I'll see them a month later. How are you getting on? I'm still working on just this thing I've got to tweak. And I was like, I think what you need to be doing is trying to get some business, and what you've got is fine. And you can iterate, you can change. Not like I'm saying, not to pivot drastically, but you've got to get the balance right.
And I think all copywriting, if you live with it for a little while, sleep on it. And I was going to ask, did you throw it out to other people to sense check it on other people?
Yeah, in the early days, we wrote it all, and then we'd put it in front of people to say, and that's a big thing. It is sense checking beyond yourself or your founding partners. And I think sense checking on lots of things is crucial, not to the point where it may distract you and put you off, because your belief's got to carry you through to a degree. But we would sense check it. I'd put it in front of people and say, there's this, we're doing it like this. And we got this overwhelming response of, that's exactly how I want to be talked to or spoken to, or that's the way you're describing, also the way you're describing what travel means or should mean to people. Again, this pursuit of feeling. People just said, yeah, it's a really refreshing take on it. And why hasn't someone talked about it like that before? Or why hasn't someone not just talked about it, but created experiences that would deliver these feelings before, rather than people saying, oh, I went there and then this happened and it was great. Rather go, why don't you go to find this thing and it's in that place that lead with the experience.
And if someone's struggling to get their brand story down, what advice would you give them to get started?
Stream of consciousness is good. Just write it down. Think about structure, and even though we've talked earlier about brevity, just get something down. Just write it like you'd be writing in a diary or homework. Don't even think about tone of voice. Just
Get it out
put
of your
down
head.
what your story is. Get it out of your head and then come
Yeah.
back. And then and also, there's lots of people who aren't copywriters who aren't necessarily articulate. That's when you go to your network, speak to someone. There's lots of great like freelance brand strategists and great companies like yours who can help people take that and turn it into something that's meaningful and that will resonate. And so I think sometimes with brand, it can feel overwhelming to people because it's like you said earlier, like brand is this
People
grand
think it
word,
needs
right?
to be finished. Yeah.
It's
It's
huge.
never
And
finished.
when people talk about brands, it's like often like, talk about these huge brands and it's like, what is it? Yeah, it's not finished, but just get something down and come back to it and refine it, but don't overthink it. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Don't overthink it.
And just get
'Cause that's,
going. A lot of
because
people
once
get busy thinking, and I think a lot of people can be distracted. They're like, I need to spend all this time on this. It's you're avoiding the thing that you actually need to go and do.
well,
And
that's
brand,
it.
I think, can be one of those things like, I'm
Yeah,
not
it
ready
definitely.
yet. Just
Yeah,
go.
the amount of times I've heard that you're not ready yet.
No
I
one's
think you
looking.
are. I think you are. Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah. No one's looking. Everyone's. I remember when we started that Tomato, there was, we got the site ready, and I think the last 4 days, we just were in the office and sleeping there, getting it done because there's a deadline because there was some press coming out. And we eventually got it live, thank God, because we're going to be overwhelmed. And this piece of press came out. I remember it was in, I think it was GQ.
Strong
And
launch coverage.
but well, it was included. We got to know one of the editors there, and he included us in this kind of roundup. But it was their Men of the Year issue, so it was really thick, and it was a small mention, but it was a mention in GQ the same. And we thought, wow, we are going to be absolutely. Is the website going to crash? And I think the only phone call we got like in the next 3 days was someone trying to sell us advertising space.
Yeah.
So it's, even that was quite a good lesson to go, look, you can just crack on, and also you got to push on. You can.
And there's something about, I think I found putting stuff out there and knowing that other people will maybe see it eventually. I don't know, I'm not articulating this at all well. You see it how other people see it faster, and then you
Yeah.
know how to fix it rather than sit on it, try and make it perfect in your bubble. It's almost like you have to put it out to the public to then go, oh God, I've completely missed that obvious thing. I can quickly change it.
You have to. And I think that the other thing is obviously I think that's one of the big things when you're starting a business is the bit about putting out there it's the most nerve-wracking bit, right? Because it's something that you really believe in, you're really passionate about, you in the back of your mind, even though you've spoken to people, which you must, quite often that's still a relatively small network. So it's the first time where you're effectively putting your head above the parapet and going, this is us, what do you think? And you built your launch strategy. And it is a bit intimidating because you have those doubts. Everyone has them. Well, what if they don't? And we were lucky that people did like it, but at the same time, we definitely got people going, oh, whatever. Yeah, and that's when you move into you've got to be thick-skinned. You can't be don't be too precious about things, or let that one go. Listen to that person, but just ignore that. So yeah, it's like the final step, isn't it? It's not the final step, but it's like the final step of properly launching when you press go live on your site or you launch a campaign, and you're exposing yourself and along with your brand story for everyone to come and have a good look at you. And hopefully most people are positive and saying, good for you. I like what you're doing. I see that you're trying. It's really great. But at the same time, we also know in the world we live in, that's not always the case. And you can get tall poppy syndrome, you get lots of stuff. But that's where you got to just keep on keeping on.
Oh, I found recently we're 3.5 years in, we got B Corp certified in September, and the B Corp backlash I was not expecting. I was like, oh God, I thought I'd done a really good thing. And a lot of people are like, oh, why would you bother? Why that certificate? I was like, I know I've done the right thing here. So that I'll dial down the volume on that criticism.
That's it. It's like where you just got to be, just goes back to what you believe in.
Your brand, your values, you've thought about it and you're steadfast in that value. It will bolster you in those dark days where you're like, what am I doing this for?
Please you don't have to be for everyone. And so it's just recognize, yeah, that's it. So it's those things. And yeah, look, we've done countless things over the years, launches of new products or partnerships, and you're always going to get some dissenting voices, because sadly that is just the way it is. And everyone's entitled to their opinion, but you just make sure you listen to the ones that count, I think.
Big question. Why did you call it Black Tomato?
That was from travels we'd taken after university. I ended up randomly working in Moscow for a little bit. I was working in London in internship, and the company I was working for asked if I wanted to go and help out on a project they were doing in Russia. And I was just wide-eyed and wanting to travel all the time. So I said, great. So went there for a bit, got to know Russia, then went off and was doing other traveling with my partners. And then when we came back to London working the jobs, we still had this connection to Russia. So we'd go to Moscow every now and then. And it was when we were in a restaurant in Moscow. It was a Ukrainian restaurant, actually, which is really sad, actually, when you think about it. But the black tomato was on the menu. And we said, that's a black tomato? And we had a very impassioned speech from the waiter saying it's this rare form of fruit, but when you find it, it tastes amazing. And that just stuck in our heads that we wanted to be the black tomato of travel, so offering these rare quality experiences. And it was an experience that we had together at Tight Travels. I think a lot of people thought we just had a bucket of colours and a bucket of fruit and vegetables and just picked out the ones that seemed to be least weird. But no, there was meaning behind it. There is a story behind it, which actually it was funny. When we started the company, this is probably not the best advice on how to spend your money, but we thought it was great at the time. We've got these business cards, and on the business card, on one side, we had the story about why black tomato, but it was covered in this pink ink, which was heat sensitive. So when you rub the card, the story would emerge. And so it looked cool, and but they were expensive. But it was just a real talking point. So we give cards and they go, write the name, and you rub the card and the thing would appear. And it was funny because I think then a year later, when we came to do business cards again, we're like, we're going to probably not spend that much. But so we'd hand out these business cards and it just had the name and the pink thing on the back. But you'd see people there just rubbing this pink stuff, and they were like, it's not heat sensitive. But we really, we wanted to put the story out there, explain who we are and why.
Huge congratulations on all of your successes. Something that we do with our podcast guests is the guest before has a question for the next guest. However, given your season 1 of branding, we don't have a question for you. But do you have a question for our next guest?
And is this on branding?
It could be anything as a founder. One friend a few weeks ago asked, what cartoon character would you be if you could as a founder? Another one was like, what do you do when you have those awful days? How do you pull yourself out of the weeds? Anything that might be in your...
I would be, so mine, what I always ask is, when was the closest moment to when you thought, I've got to stop? And what pulled you back from that? And how did you get pulled back from that? So that's, I talk about that to founders, like, what's been your moment where you're like, I just can't do this anymore? Not because it's just like circumstances, environmental factors, like this is the end of the road. And how did you get out of that?
Yeah, brilliant question. Thank you. And I think it's really important that, and this is something that's come through in every single interview I've done, I think we're up to 89. Everyone has said you are going to have very difficult days like you've never had before. Be okay with that. And I think a lot of people are, I'm going to start a company and have limitless holiday. And I'm like, good luck with that one. Yeah. So I think it's really, given our audience are new founders and start and scale ups, to say that's okay to feel like that, and it isn't necessarily the end of the world. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, I think you've also got to, it sounds weird and it's difficult in the moment, you've got to embrace that. There's this book that Adam Morgan wrote, the guy who wrote Eat the Big Fish, called A Beautiful Constraint. And the idea, the premise is that in tough times, in constraints, actual beauty can emerge. And so it's like when you're limited by something, how you innovate to get around it. And actually, then there's loads of great examples of that. And we talk about that in our company, and that's how we think. So you've got to lean into the difficult times, and they will be difficult. And when you're in the moment, it will feel like you don't want to do it anymore. But if you can lift your eyes to the horizon and believe that you'll get past it. And we often talk about this phrase, everyone uses, we'll find a way. If you just have that in your mind, I'll find a way, that will get you through those. But difficult times are part and parcel of it. But say if you're going into it's going to happen when you first, confronted with one. I think that does separate entrepreneurs from other people. I think when you're met with a difficult time, it's whether you embrace the challenge and lean into it, And I don't say I relish those things, but I sometimes do find the kind of, when we've got our backs to the wall on something and it feels like it's you against the world and I'm going to get through it. The satisfaction I get from that, in terms of, we've had that pandemic, ash cloud in Iceland in 2010 when the world stopped flying. Sessions, it's just no one else is going to get me out of this.
Yeah.
And the satisfaction that you then have with your partners and if your team are involved, it almost trumps for me sometimes like the plaudits, the awards, the other financial performance in terms of satisfaction, because that's
so
I
much
think what separates
harder to earn.
And it's surviving it and dealing with the stress of it, and that's also what separates it massively from doing I wouldn't say regular, but just say a job somewhere else, because that's what comes from owning your own business.
Yeah. A question from me actually is, how do you manage your stress?
A few ways. I think for years I just thought what I was obviously stressed, but I just thought that was normal. So I just was and then it was like, I think I tried to, a combination of reading and exercise and then trying to find quiet times. I've flitted in and out of meditation. I'm interested in it, but sometimes you've got to work hard at it, and I don't think I've cracked it. But exercise and reading, and then just distractions in terms of whether it's family or doing things. You just got to give into that.
Step away from it. Have a break.
You just have to, and it's hard. And I think it never leaves you, because when it's yours, it's not something you can switch off. But it's finding things that are like, if you're working out or there's this thing called High Rocks, which is this competitive CrossFit thing. So I've started doing that this year with a mate, and you train for that. And when you're going and doing that, it's just something that you can shift your attention onto. And for the times when you're doing that and training that, everything else gets forgotten for a while. And I think I think it's hard. It'd be hard for me to say, I'm just going to go and sit in a room and try not to think about it, because it won't work. We could talk about this with our holidays. So there's this idea, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but there's this one notion that the best way to relax on holidays is just to go and lie on a beach with a book. And for some people, that just is not, because if you're lying there and your phone's blowing up with stuff, it's very hard to switch off. So we often talk about challenges in terms of travel. We have a service called Get Lost, where we literally get people lost in environments and they have to explore their way out of it, and they don't know where they are, and we've got special force people in the background, so who can see our clients, they can't see them, and it's a challenge. They've got to explore their way out of this environment. It could be over a weekend or 10 days, but it's a physical and mental challenge, because you're having to think the whole time. And actually that mental focus on every step you're taking is actually a form of relaxation, because everything else that is probably on your mind at home, at work, just falls away, because you don't have the brain capacity thinking about it.
I don't know why, but when you don't think about something, you then come back to it with the answer. And I have no idea how that works, but it works. So meditation,
I agree.
Running, swimming, hiking, not being on your phone, not having it front and center. There's something so amazing that when you come back to it, you're like, oh, actually, done.
Yeah. The other thing I'm a big advocate of is just learning something new every year if you can. So all the studies out there show that if you're trying to learn something new, separate to what your work is, for your brain, it actually keeps developing your brain, right? And so that kind of give you additional benefits when you're back to work. And so this year, I've always loved wine when I travel and stuff, but I always want to know more. So I went and did this wine qualification for 3 days in a classroom, and lots of homework and exams at the end. And I loved it, not just because of the subject matter, but because I just was learning something new. And so at Black Tomato, we have an employee benefit called Curious Courses. So every year we give every member of staff a budget that they can go and spend on any course they want. Nothing to do with travel. It could be like learning a language. It could be an instrument or whatever. And we just want people to go and learn and do things separately, because that, again, is a distraction. It's just taking your head out of the workspace.
But they'll come back to the day job more creative as well, with better ideas. So it benefits everybody. That's a really good idea.
Learning is good.
Amazing. Thank you, Tom, so much for your advice. Is there any last golden nugget piece of advice you'd like to offer a founder in starting a company? Could be to any.
I think there's two pieces. When I've been asked, this is what I say, and I think about, if I'm starting a business, the two things I'd be is like, just find something that you really believe in. And what I mean by why I say that, because everyone will be like, obviously, it's more like you could come up with business ideas or see a business that may by your spreadsheet look really financially successful. And it might be. If you don't really believe in it or don't know it, the first time you hit that barrier, because it will happen, is where you need that belief to keep you going. because you're passionate about it. If it's something you've done just because you think it's going to make a load of money, but you don't really care so much for it, yeah, some people are lucky and that works, but a lot aren't, and then it just falls away. So believe in it. And then the other one is, once you've got something, and we've touched upon it already, it's just remember that it's you, right? So you're accountable to you. So it's not a 9 to 5. It can be, but in a good way, all encompassing. If you love it and you believe in it, it won't feel like a job. It will just feel like you're getting to work on something you're passionate about, with the highs and the lows. And when I started the company, my father, he was an entrepreneur and built businesses. I was sort of saying, what was his advice? And he said, in those early days, and I'm not advocating this long term, but when we talk about Steve, like you need to be obsessed with it, and in a good way. So it does need to take a priority, and that's can be hard. And certainly we started when we were in our kind of mid to late 20s, and we probably had less responsibilities, less accountability to others. It's easier, but don't underestimate what you need to put in. So if you can be obsessed with it and then build it, and then get to a point where you can have other people and you can build a better work-life balance, because you need that in the long run. But in those early days, I think we all know people who dreamt up great ideas in the pub and have started it at 11 a.m. in the pub and just not really kept it going. And more often than not, they're not the ones who are still working on it. So
it's friends in salary. I'm salaried just by a company I started, but it's friends in normal jobs, which a lot of founders talk about. He's like, oh God, you work so hard, you need a break. And you just don't get it.
Yeah.
You don't get it, and you never will get it. And then someone else said you're never going to be employed by someone else again, because they know that
that's
you're
it.
on that side.
It's really true. And I think also because you're always working, if people say you're traveling here or you're flexible, you can go and do this at this time. But that's the benefit. When you're in boss, if you can get it done in the right way, the flexibility is a real perk. But don't underestimate it. But if you believe in it, it's very easy to obsess over it, because it's something you love.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom, so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
If you'd like to contact Tom, you can find all of his details in the show notes, along with a recap of the advice that he has so kindly shared. I really hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and would so appreciate it if you were able to rate and review, because it does help other people to find us. To incentivise this a little, I'd be delighted to share one of our written PR guides with you on how to share editorial coverage legally. If you want to just DM us or drop us an email at hello@fallowfieldmason.com with review in the title, I'd be delighted to share it with you. Thank you so much.